respond to some of the specific evidence that the prosecutors put forward around that 2015 murder you mentioned as being so central to this case, including the Chevy Tahoe lyrics?
Young Thug's lawyer Brian Steele, speaking about the Chevy Tahoe, came right out and said, all of these lyrics are subject to interpretation. They're generic.
And is it 100 rounds in a Tahoe like bullets in a Tahoe? Or is someone driving a Tahoe with 100 rounds stuck to bullets in it?
He says 100 rounds in a Tahoe. Does that mean bullet holes in a Tahoe, or does that mean somebody carrying a gun within a Tahoe?
The next line has Tahoe. So behind me.
And Thug's lawyer is saying, sure, maybe these crimes occurred, but you cannot connect them to an artist because he made work that seems to resemble it.
These are not confessions. These are not admissions. This is art.
So somebody watching this trial very closely, how strong, how weak does the prosecution's case appear to be at this point? It's early, but I'm going to imagine you have started to think about that question.
I think this is a very, very complex
Take the next right onto North D Street, then turn left onto Gordon Avenue.
case. And it is hard to explain to a jury how all of these disparate crimes from across nearly a decade committed by many different people are all connected to one organization, and specifically
Take the next left onto Gordon Avenue.
one man, Young Thug. So I think they're being very deliberate about laying out the information that they have and trying to prove their case one witness at a time. They say they might call up to 400 people to testify.
In a quarter mile, turn left onto North B Street.
This could take a very, very, very long time. I think there's still a lot of evidence yet to be seen, including testimony from people who say they were active members of YSL, and we're going to see how that plays out over the following months.
Take the next left onto Rhea Avenue.
Let's just assume for a moment that the prosecution is successful here, and that Young Thug is found in some way guilty of
In
being
1,000 feet, turn left onto North B Street.
a criminal conspiracy. What is that gonna mean for the wider world that you cover, the world of hip-hop?
I think it potentially has seismic effects on this strain
Take the next left onto North B Street.
of popular rap music. So much of it is about believing these artists, that they really come from the life that they say they do, and that they really do the things that they're rapping about. There are many young fans around the country who are invested in that idea. And yet if the prosecution can successfully say that all
Take the next left onto Black Street.
of this gang imagery, these videos, these lyrics, these social media are the glue that holds together a criminal conspiracy, then I think there are a lot of rappers out there who are going to second guess the way they present themselves and the way they talk about where they come from.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto North 3rd Street.
And then when you think about these communities themselves, the city of Atlanta and Cleveland Avenue, the neighborhood that Young Thug comes from, you have the prosecution saying that YSL was terrorizing this neighborhood and that now it should be a safer place. But if in fact Young Thug is a product of this environment and this is going to continue
Turn right onto North 3rd Street.
with or without him, this cycle, that's where we get a lot of this rap music, is because these neighborhoods are neglected, because there's no infrastructure, no education. So I think that it leaves us in a tough place. Are we saving these communities by taking these artists out of them? Or is he the pride of the community and in fact made something great out of something horrible?
Is a successful prosecution here not just a kind of legal framework for going after other hip-hop groups,
In a quarter mile, turn left onto Heaton Street.
but is it going to deprive the city of Atlanta potentially of something, or make it
Yeah, like, is the rap the cause or is rap the effect?
Well, Joe, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Take the next left onto Heaton Street. Continue on Heaton Street for 3/4 of a mile.
I'll be right back.
Support for this podcast comes from Ravensburger. A pro might take an hour to finish a jigsaw puzzle, but can you guess how long it takes to create one of Ravensburger's classic puzzles? We'll give you 3 seconds. If you guessed a week, you got it. Every die, the metal stencil used to cut the puzzle pieces, takes over 160 hours to craft and shape. Are you a puzzle master or problem solver? Discover countless quality puzzles from 24 to over 40,000 pieces at Ravensburger.com.
Here's what else you need to know today. On Monday, the Times reported that the Israeli military has begun an invasion of southern Gaza, a long-awaited operation that could decide the fate of its war with Hamas and put Palestinian civilians in even greater peril. Now that Israel has overtaken parts of northern Gaza, southern Gaza is the last section of the territory under full Hamas control. Israel is expected to focus its attacks on the city of Han Yunis, where Israel believes Hamas's military and political leadership has sought shelter since fleeing the north. And the White House has warned congressional leaders that the United States will run out of money to send
In 1,000 feet, turn right onto North Fair Avenue.
weapons to Ukraine by the end of the year, unless lawmakers quickly approve emergency military aid. The warning was President Biden's latest attempt to pressure Republicans, especially in the House, to
Turn right onto North Fair Avenue, then turn left onto Fairgrove Avenue.
further fund Ukraine's military. Without the money, according to the White House, Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russia would be in
Take the next left onto Fairgrove Avenue.
jeopardy. Today's episode was produced by Sydney Harper and Michael Simon Johnson, with help from Luke Vanderpleet. It was edited by John Ketchum, Michael Benoit, and Brendan Klinkenberg. Contains original music by Diane Wong and Pat McCusker, and was engineered by Alyssa Moxley. Our theme music is by Jim Runberg and Ben Lansford of Wonderly. That's it for today. I'm Michael LeBlanc. See you tomorrow.
Continue for 12 miles. This podcast is supported by the Working Forests Initiative. A working forest is guided by a simple principle: plant more trees than are harvested. That's why in U.S. working forests, hundreds of millions of trees are planted every year, and only 2% are ever harvested and replanted in a single year, which helps ensure that working forests work for years to come. Working Forests Initiative. We don't just plan for tomorrow, we plant it. Learn more at workingforestsinitiative.com.
This message comes from Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort. Journey through the heart of Europe on a Viking longship, a thoughtful service, destination-focused dining, and cultural immersion on board and on shore. With a variety of voyages and sailing dates to choose from, now is the time to explore Europe's waterways. Learn more at Viking.com.
Here's your money briefing for Tuesday, December 5th. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. People trying to manage their personal finances often go off track by applying an old set of rules. My new book from the Wall Street Journal guides you through new rules of money to help you reach your financial goals.
So often we have milestones set for us. You graduate from college and you think, okay, I'm immediately supposed to set forth on this path that my parents were on and my grandparents were on. And I talk to a lot of people who don't even want those milestones. They don't want to own a home right now, or they don't want to get married. And setting your own milestones then also allows you to reorder that path and tailor it to your own experience.
We'll talk to Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Julia Carpenter after the break.
today have a big opportunity to help extend the life cycle of their equipment and minimize costly downtime by using a modern enterprise asset management system that provides data-driven insights and supports predictive maintenance. Find out how the IBM Maximo application suite, available through Amazon Web Services, uses AI and connected sensors to make asset management proactive.
Managing our personal finances is something many of us do every day, but a changing set of rules can create obstacles toward reaching our goals. Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Julia Carpenter is co-author of the new book, The New Rules of Money, and she joins me now. So Julia, why did you and personal finance deputy coverage chief Beret Lamb feel the need to write this book?
One of the things Beret and I talked about early on is how so much financial advice that we've read or asked from advisors or talked to experts about is not for everyone. It's very beginner. This is how you open a bank account. This is how you understand what your cash flow is. Or it's incredibly advanced about, calibrating your investments. And there's not something that speaks to everyone or that helps people who are literate a little bit but not feeling confident in themselves. And we were actually really inspired by cookbooks for this, kind of a similar thing. You think about opening like Claire Safitz's Dessert Person, and someone who wants to make a sugar cookie can make a sugar cookie, or someone who wants to make the croquembouche can make the croquembouche, or maybe the croquembouche person wants to make a sugar cookie that day. And we were thinking, what is something we can do that feels like that it's not condescending, but it's also not making assumptions about your knowledge already.
Ah, I like that. Cooking in the kitchen and personal finances coming together.
It's really similar when you think about it. You learn by doing, and that's really what personal finance is too. You don't just make a croquembouche if you've never made a sugar cookie.
Let's talk about some of the new rules that people should know about. In the book, you talk about the importance of setting milestones. Why is that important?
So often we have milestones set for us. You graduate from college and you think, okay, I'm immediately supposed to set forth on this path that my parents were on and my grandparents were on and I see other people on. And if I'm not meeting these things in the same time that they were meeting them, I'm doing something wrong. And I talk to a lot of people who don't even want those milestones. They don't want to own a home right now, or they don't want to get married, or their goal is to one day quit their job and work for themselves. And setting your own milestones then also allows you to reorder that path and tailor it to your own experience.
How would somebody do that?
So the first thing we talk about in the book is identifying achievable milestones. Example, I want to own a house one day. I don't own a house right now. I can't just put own a house on my to-do list. What I can put is save for a down payment, talk to a real estate agent, talk to a friend who is a homeowner. When I'm saving for that down payment, where do I want to put it? How much money do I need? All of these little mini goals that lead up to this bigger milestone. And so for me then, a more achievable milestone is get X number of dollars in my down payment account by the end of the year. It makes me feel more accomplished, but it also makes me feel like there's room for that to move, or room for me to supersede it, or room for me to add to it.
So much of what we do in our financial lives or other parts of our lives are based on habits or patterns. Why are people's habits important with regard to their personal finances?
Habits are the foundation of good personal finance. Saving is a habit. Spending is a habit. How you talk about money with your friends or not talk about money with your friends is a habit. And a lot of behavioral science shows that if we are paying attention to those things, if we are paying attention to what we find ourselves doing without thinking, then we're more attuned to it and we have the power to change it. It's when you're not looking at those things that they sort of take you.
And we all have bad habits in our lives in lots of different areas. But when it comes to our finances, how can we turn bad habits into good ones?
One of the things is that you can look at that bad habit and understand where it came from. So you have much more control over. If I'm looking and I'm like, wow, I buy $20 salads every single day at work. Why am I doing this? And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's because I am so rushed at the end of the night and in the morning that I really don't have time to make my lunch. Or because I'm buying lunch every day, I'm not even thinking about it when I'm grocery shopping at the beginning of the week to buy things to make lunch at home? How can I work myself backwards from there and do that?
People might not be able to improve their financial situation if they really don't have a full picture of their assets. What does a financial review look like?
This is the thing that is the most important, and it's also the thing that scares people the most. I talk to so many people in the course of my reporting about student debt who don't want to face these numbers. They don't even want to face how much money they make. They don't want to look at the whole year and understand it. Because once you are seeing things in aggregate, then you're able to really pinpoint where some of the things that you can celebrate are and also where some of the pain points are. But it's also really intimidating. If you look at your income taxes, for example, there's a reason people just want to put it into TurboTax and not look at it. It's because it's really overwhelming. So we have a couple different activities in the book where we walk people through how to do that in a way that is so low lift that you don't feel that sort of crushing sense of failure, but you also feel like, okay, this is my thing. This is my control. This is how I can take over this.
So how can somebody go about doing that?
In the book, we call it Know Your Numbers. It's an exercise I wrote myself. I do it all the time. It's helping you actually take pen to paper, or if you want to do a Google sheet, whatever is best for you. Take pen to paper and look at every item that encompasses their financial life. So how much money do I have on my checking account right now? How much money do I expect to get in my checking account by the end of the month? How much money do I have on my credit card? What's my credit card maximum?
So it's not just what you have, but projecting what you think the numbers will be.
Yeah, it's once you have a picture of what you will have, then you can expand from there. Right now, this is my snapshot. Okay, what's my snapshot at the end of the month? What's my snapshot in 3 months from now? And from there, you can understand, okay, I feel like I'm always just barely getting by. I'm actually not. I have way more money in my 401k than I thought I did. Oh, it's good to look at that. Okay, I could actually be contributing more. Or you think, oh, wow, there's way more money on that credit card that I had forgotten about and, opened one time and never wanted to look at again. What's the interest rate on that? Wow, okay, I should prioritize paying that off.
So a lot of knowledge involved, but it also seems like it's chipping away at a fear factor.
Absolutely. What we want this book to be is as fun as it can. That's why we really wanted it to be a workbook. Not just a textbook that you're going to page through and walk away and say, okay, I guess I learned a lot about investing, but what do I do with all of that? We wanted to include exercises, activities, pages that are just for reflection, pages that walk you through a game or exercise that helps you apply a lot of what we're describing to your own life. So you can fill in the numbers instead of us just giving you hypothetical examples, and that way it feels more impactful, but it also feels more enjoyable.
That's Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Julia Carpenter. The book is called The New Rules of Money, and it's available wherever books are sold. And that's it for your Money Briefing. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the last installment in our series to discuss how kids and parents can practice money habits to keep their online money safe. This episode was produced by Ariana Osprey, with supervising producer Melanie Roy. I'm J.R. Webb for the Wall Street Journal. We'll be back tomorrow morning. Thanks for listening.
True Crime Stories Ever Told is a new true crime podcast unlike anything you've ever heard before. You like true crime? What do you like about it? You like hearing about how victims are brutalized, beaten, killed? Do you delight in hearing the grisly details of all the crimes against women? Yeah, I didn't think so. What if I told you this podcast is a little different? What if I told you these are the greatest true crime stories ever told? I'm Mary Kay McBrayer, your host. I write about true crime, which means I live in the research wormhole, but I'm not necessarily interested in the blood and the gore, the headline-grabbing stuff. I'm much more interested in the people behind the stories. What do these crimes say about all of us? You can listen to me every week on the greatest true crime stories ever told, where I dig into crimes where women aren't just victims. We're cops, we're lawyers, we're that crucial witness, that crusading coroner, and sometimes we're even the killer. The title says it all. It's the greatest true crime stories ever told. These are are the most iconic, the most mysterious, the most fascinating. We've been hard at work in the archives. We've combed the libraries. We've interviewed the journalists and the authors, the prosecutors and the investigators, and now we have for you the greatest true crime stories ever told. Listen to the greatest true crime stories ever told on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
NPR.
This is the Indicator from Planet Money. I'm Darren Woods.
And I'm Paddy Hirsch. Obesity is a disease that affects more than 40% of Americans. It contributes to and exacerbates hundreds of other diseases, including the biggest killers of Americans. It's heart disease, cancer, and COVID-19.
That makes obesity expensive. The Milken Institute, which leans moderately liberal, estimated that in 2016, healthcare costs related to obesity and being overweight added up to $480.7 billion. There's an additional $1.24 trillion cost to the wider economy due to lost economic productivity.
So all of these new weight loss drugs that we've been hearing about recently kind of sound like a lifesaver, right? Both for individuals and for the economy. But while you might think from the media coverage that everyone is taking Wegovy or Mounjaro or even Ozempic, the diabetic drug, to deal with their weight loss, the fact is that they're not.
In fact, fewer than 30% of Americans have access to these drugs through their health plans. Medicare patients, meanwhile, have no access because of legislation that forbids Medicare from covering medications used for weight loss.
So on today's show, we'll find out why the uptake of weight loss drugs has been so slow, despite the long-term financial incentives. And we'll see how social conditioning and short-term thinking is still trampling all over economics in the weight loss debate. That's coming up after the break.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Indeed. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search. Match with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/indicator. Terms and conditions apply.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business. Spectrum Business is made to work the way small business works. That's why Spectrum Business provides internet, phone, and mobile services that are made to work as hard as you do. Learn more at spectrum.com/work.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Charles Schwab. Schwab has financial consultants ready to serve you, plus professional answers and 24/7 live help. And it's backed by Schwab's Satisfaction Guarantee. Visit schwab.com/satisfaction to learn what's included and how it works.
Obesity has become a critical part of the healthcare landscape in America. In 1962, 3.4% of American adults had obesity. Data gathered just ahead of the COVID-19 pandemic showed that that number has now risen to more than 40%.
This disease is deadly. Excess weight kills as many as 500,000 Americans every year, and it's expensive. John Cawley is Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Cornell University.
We estimate that the U.S. Spends an additional $289 billion a year treating obesity-related illness.
And that's just healthcare. John says the disease taxes the wider economy as well in a variety of ways.
Employers have been very concerned about obesity for quite a long time, and that's because of both absenteeism, presenteeism, and health insurance impact. So the absenteeism is people missing work. The presenteeism is people being at work but being less productive. And then there's the impact of the obesity on the health insurance costs and premium.
We're talking about trillions of dollars a year here, which is why weight
In a quarter mile, turn left onto Reynolds Avenue.
loss drugs like Novo Nordisk's Wegovy and Eli Lilly's Mounjaro and Zepbound look like they could be something of a godsend to employers, to the government, and to doctors like Kate Varney.
So how you been feeling? Yeah? Okay.
She's the obesity medicine director at the University of Virginia.
It's exciting, right? I mean, as medicine progresses and we get smarter and we understand about the causes of obesity, finally we have effective treatments.
Highly effective on the face of it. People are losing
Turn
up
left onto Reynolds Avenue, then your destination will be on the left.
to a fifth of their body weight. That's enough in many cases to get patients out of the danger zone. Best of all, Kate says the key ingredients in these drugs, the GLP-1 receptor agonists, have been proven to be not only effective, but safe.
The first GLP-1 receptor agonist came out in 2005, extenatide, for treatment of type 2 diabetes. But only when it started being used for obesity have people lost their mind.
And by losing their minds, she means the resistance that she's encountered from employers and politicians when she's advocated for adding weight loss drugs to corporate healthcare plans and to Medicare.
If a medication came out that
Your destination is on the left.
could put a cancer in remission at a rate of 30 to 40%, people would be going crazy. And they would all want that treatment. But here we are with obesity and be like, yeah, we'll see how it pans out. Is it safe? There's this stigma and this negative association with patients with obesity that they're just lazy and they're not doing what they need to do, when in reality, they've tried everything. They're at their wit's end of what they need to do.
It doesn't help, of course, that a lot of the publicity around these weight loss drugs has centered around their use by people who are not obese or even overweight. We're looking at you, Elon Musk. And then there's the fact that
going to Middletown, City of Middletown garage. I gotta fix a bus passenger counter. Or at least check it out. Okay, man. I'm kind of hungry. Where can I go? Go to Mickey D's.
Yes, indeed. There's a drug combo called fen-phen, prescribed to patients in the 1990s. It appeared to contribute to heart valve complications, and the FDA requested its withdrawal. It's kind of a disaster.
Perhaps the biggest barrier for widespread adoption, though, is cost. These medications can be blisteringly expensive. The list price for a month's supply of both Eli Lilly's Mounjaro and Novo Nordisk's Wegovy is more than $1,000 a month.
Yeah, so it would be a hugely expensive proposition for Medicare to start offering these medications. And that's even with the discounts that the government would almost certainly negotiate. And the same goes for companies. Kate says the employers that she's spoken to about offering these drugs through the health plans, well, they balk at the idea. They worry about raising premiums on their workforce and paying sharply higher costs to their insurers.
All they see is the initial upfront cost and not the downstream improvement in the health of their company, both in their employees and their financial health.
If companies and the government were willing to play the long game, she says, everyone would save money. She points to a recent report from the Schaefer Center at USC, which estimates that Medicare could save $175 billion over a decade. That's if it made weight loss drugs available to all those who needed them.
Yeah, and some employers do appear to see the long-term value proposition here. Roughly 22% of companies offered coverage for prescription weight loss drugs last year. And a recent survey suggests that that number might double by the end of next year.
Kate says that even if employers do opt into offering these drugs, insurers, in her experience, aren't making it easy for physicians to prescribe them and for patients to get them.
The insurance companies can create arbitrary requirements that make it very difficult to actually get the product to the patient. An example of this is the prior authorization process. It has been a nightmare. There has to be specific things in the documentation. And if that's not in my note, it's just been rejected. And they don't always give a good explanation of why it's been rejected.
The barriers to making weight loss drugs as freely available as, say, statins seem considerable. But things are changing fast. Cornell's John Corley points out that while media coverage has made a great deal out of the prices of these drugs, the actual cost to the consumer is a lot less. And the landscape of the weight loss drug market is becoming increasingly competitive.
As newer and better drugs come on the market, there's just going to be more and more price competition, and so that benefits the consumer. Everybody benefits when there's this competition that leads to lower prices.
That competition should increase with demand as workers push employers to opt into offering these drugs. And if the government gets on board, weight loss drugs have been off the table for Medicare since 2003, but there is a movement on Capitol Hill to include them in the government program. The Treat and Reduce Obesity Act was reintroduced over the summer by a bipartisan group of legislators.
And even people who in the past have been vehemently opposed to the idea of treating weight loss with medication are changing tack now. Seema Sistani is the CEO of Weight Watchers. She had a conversation with CNN recently. And, you know, Weight Watchers in the past has been this sort of champion of just using diet and exercise and, you know, mental health treatments to get rid of excess weight. Well, in this interview, she effectively embraced the idea that drugs can be part of a solution for people struggling with obesity.
It's a chronic condition, and therefore it is not a choice. We needed to be the first to be proud and loud about the fact that we got it wrong in the past. We've been treating these medications like it's a vanity, and it's not, it's life-saving.
At the University of Virginia, Kate Barney is heartened by these winds of change. She's struggled with obesity herself in the past, and she believes that the most formidable barrier to embracing weight loss drugs is actually the patient.
One of the questions I get a lot is, am I going to have to be on this medication forever? I really don't want to be on this medication forever.
She says we don't look down on patients who have to take insulin or statins for the rest of their lives to keep a condition under control. But the stigma of obesity is such that patients who have it often look down on themselves.
They believe what they see out there in the media, and they have internalized that, and they still have a lot of bias against themselves.
In some ways, she says, the hardest people to convince when it comes to adopting weight loss drugs might be the very patients who need them the most.
This episode was produced by Julia Ritchie with engineering by Nisha Hines. It was fact-checked by Sarah Juarez. Kate Buchanan is our editor, and The Indicator is a production of NPR.
When Israel went to war with Hamas, there immediately after erupted this conversation about what side everyone is on. It's maybe neither right nor useful, but it happened. What social media shows me, a once young person of color, and my co-host today, Halima Shah, a still young person of color, is that many young people of color are siding with Palestinians. But why? Two things you hear. Israelis are colonizers and Palestinians simply want their land decolonized. And also, Palestinians are on our side, like during our various American racial uprisings and reckonings and officer-involved shootings.
I remember there were Palestinians in Ferguson who were sharing their street battles with the police, that there were tactics and ways to protect yourself from tear gas and things like that. And honestly, I just saw the struggle as one and the same.
On Today Explained, why so much of the world seems to think the Palestinian struggle is also their struggle. Support for today's show comes from Vanta. If you're building a business, then achieving compliance with frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001 might help you win bigger deals, enter new markets, and deepen trust with customers, but it can also cost you time and money. Vanta wants you to know that it automates compliance and simplifies security. In fact, Vanta customers report saving up to 400 hours of work and 85% of associated costs. To learn more about what this is, how Vanta works, and to claim a special offer, visit vanta.com/explained. That's VANTA.com/explained.
Support for Today Explained comes from BetterHelp. The holidays can be a lot of fun, like, the parties and reconnecting with friends and family, but it's not for everyone. Some people don't like that stuff, and the holidays can keep you from feeling those sad feelings, or at least help you through a tough time. If you're looking for convenient, affordable online therapy, you might want to try BetterHelp. You can find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/explain today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/explain.
It's Today Explained. I'm Noel King.
And I'm Halima Shah.
And right at the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas, I saw something on Twitter that had me rabbit holing. It was this person talking about how they were seeing people at a bodega, not Palestinians, but Egyptians and Jamaicans, if I'm remembering right, talking about Palestine as a colonial issue or struggle. And Halima, I told you about this, and you said,
I was like, are we about to talk about colonialism on this show?
Yes, we are. And so you went into the field, and where'd you go?
So I went to this meeting that was held in Chicago where people were reading the works of Ghassan Kanafani, a late Palestinian author who was a Marxist and a member of the Palestinian resistance.
Thank you all for tuning out tonight. We know the importance of political education. We know that there are many struggles that people are fighting ardently for, and that they're fighting against the things like Zionism, imperialism, and racism.
So this event was held by the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a group that is very critical to Israel and has organized a number of pro-Palestinian protests around the country. But what was interesting was that this meeting was happening in Little Village, which is a mostly Mexican working class neighborhood in Chicago.
Okay, so again, people are talking about Palestine, but they're not Palestinians. What did these people tell you about why they were there?
Well, there were two big things. One was racism. The U.S. struggles with it, and one person I spoke to, her name was Ellie Gallegos. She is actually the daughter of Mexican immigrants. They use very dehumanizing language towards Palestinians, like that they're human animals, and I think that the correlation to that is like how a lot of people use race here in Chicago in the United States to justify mistreatment of Mexicans.
Okay, so you heard about racism. Did you also hear about the C word, colonization?
Absolutely. I mean, colonization was a big theme in this room. A lot of people felt that the colonized people of the world are all, in a common struggle. One person I spoke to, Nino Brown, his family is from Jamaica, which, like a lot of places in the world, was colonized by the British.
They say that the sun never set on the English Empire because it was so large, and there's just deliberate creation of racial stratification systems and privileging one section of a population over another. Those are some of the main parallels I saw, all while describing the native population as savages, backwards, so the same way that they described African Jamaicans and the Rastafari and Maroon societies as backwards, crazy, heathens. That's exactly how they describe Palestinians.
Okay, so the next step was to ask, what is the bigger framework for understanding this as a colonial scenario? We called Columbia University professor Rashid Khalidi, a distinguished Palestinian historian. And first we learned that he's seen the same dynamic we've been observing.
I've heard it from African Americans, I've heard it from people from the Caribbean, I've heard it from people from formerly colonized places like India, parts of Africa. I've heard it from Irish people. Anybody who lived under the boot of colonialism, whether British or French or otherwise, understands somehow that there's a similarity between what their people endured and what the Palestinians have gone through.
Khalidi is a frequent guest on NPR and an op-ed writer for the New York Times. He wrote a book that both Halima and I read. It's called The 100 Years War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance. Now, the word colonialism is really contested, and to put it in your book title seems significant. So I asked him, why is he so confident that that's what this is? And he began with what he identifies as the start of today's current conflict.
It really starts with the arrival of the British in 1917 and the imposition of British colonial rule under the veil of something called the League of Nations mandate. But it was basically ruled by the British. And the British came to install what they called a Jewish national home.
The Zionist movement aims to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine secured by public law.
That in turn involved a settler colonial project. Zionism, of course, has a national aspect, but as early Zionists all understood and accepted and were not ashamed of, it was a colonial project.
And the Second Congress, Herzl establishes the Jewish Colonial Trust, which was to be the financial instrument of the Zionist organization.
They saw it that way. It was that. They saw that they were European settlers with a claim in their eyes to the land, but who understood they were coming to a non-European land to colonize it, and they talked about that openly. You had something called the Jewish Colonization Agency. That's not some anti-Semitic slur. That's what they called themselves.
It was the Jewish Colonization Association, in fact.
So, in both of these respects, it was, and I would argue still is, a colonial struggle, or an anti-colonial struggle.
The main case of the Arabs is against the British government's policy in Palestine. A policy which, if continued, will surely have as a result the replacement of the Arabs by the Jews.
Okay, so there was no hesitation about using the word colonialism at the time. It wasn't debated.
No, it was not. I mean, you have to understand, before World War II, before the era of decolonization, colonialism was in good odor with Europeans, with, the good and the great, as far as I'm concerned. It was a good thing. They were civilizing the natives and so forth. You read the way in which the League of Nations described giving European countries mandates. They were uplifting these people. So colonialism was seen as a good thing until World War II, and everything is turned upside down. And at that point, the Zionist movement rebaptizes itself as an anti-colonial government, because at that point they were on bad terms with the British.
So Israel comes into existence with the help of the British. What was the British plan for that region? What were the borders supposed to look like, and who was supposed to be able to live there?
Well, the British before they decided to take Zionism under their wing with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, for more than a decade had decided, for strategic reasons, that they must control Palestine. They needed it to defend the eastern frontiers of Egypt. They needed it because it constituted the Mediterranean terminus of the shortest land route between the Mediterranean and the Gulf. So the British wanted Palestine for strategic reasons.
At some point, they had a plan for both Palestinians and Israelis to live there, right? Or for Arabs and Jews to live there, right? How did the British want to partition the land between these two groups?
The British put forward a plan in 1937, the Peel Partition Plan, which would have created a small Jewish state, which would have expelled the large number of Palestinians who lived there under the Orwellian rubric of transfer, and would have kept part of Palestine for the British as a British possession. Later on, the United Nations, in 1947, the United Nations General Assembly, Resolution 181, on November 29th of 1947, voted for the partition of Palestine into a larger Jewish state and a smaller Arab state, even though Arabs owned most of the land, over 80% of it, actually over 90% of it.
The Jewish state will include the ports of Haifa and Tel Aviv, and the whole of the Negev Valley. The Arab will occupy the fertile eastern part. Jerusalem will come under United Nations trusteeship.
And even though Arabs constituted the two-thirds majority of the country, more than 56% of it was to be given to a Jewish state, and the rest was to be given to an Arab state. And that was a UN plan, not a British plan.
What do you say to people who insist that Jewish people have a historical tie to this land? Their origins are there, and thus they can't be considered colonists.
Well, they're right that there's a connection between Judaism and the land of Israel. That's obvious. Everybody understands that. Muslims, Christians, and Jews understand that. It's in the Quran, it's in the Bible. Nobody can dispute that the Jewish religion is rooted in this part of the world, in Palestine. The question is, who are these people who are coming, and on what basis are they coming? Well, they're coming as part of a national movement. And people who say, well, it can't be settler colonialism because it's a national movement. Well, it can be both. I mean, we live in a settler colonial reality in the United States, which is also a national reality. So is Canada, so is New Zealand, so is Australia. It's not so hard to understand. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, and the Zionist movement was both. It was a settler colonial movement to bring persecuted Jews from Europe to Palestine, where they would establish a Jewish majority state. You remove the existing population to bring in a new population. That's settler colonialism. And the fact that there is an ancient connection between the Jewish religion and the land of Israel, or Palestine, whatever you choose to call it. There's no contradiction between those three ideas. Does that mean that the people who arrive from Eastern Europe are indigenous to the land? No, they're not indigenous to the land. Their religion comes from there. Maybe or maybe not their ancestors came from there. But that's a question that doesn't give you a 20th century right. That's a biblical land deed that nobody believes, except people who are, religious. And that in modern international law, that just doesn't hold.
Professor Rashid Khalidi. Coming up, the developing world enters the chat.
Support for Today Explained comes from Shopify. Some people spend years developing the perfect idea for a business, and then sometimes it feels like others receive market-ready concepts seemingly from the universe. Whatever it is, if you want to get started selling anything, you need a way to connect your brilliant idea with the people who get it, and guess who wants to help? Shopify. They're a global e-commerce platform that can help you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, according to Shopify, including, according to Shopify, global brands like Allbirds, Rockies,
Brooklyn, plus millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries, according to Shopify. You can sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/explain, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/explain now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/explain.
Support for Today Explained comes from Noom. There is a whole big weight loss industry. It can be hard to figure out what works for you. Noom wants to tell you a bit about Noom. Noom uses science and personalization to try to help you manage your weight over the long term. Noom says that their psychology-based approach helps you build new habits and behaviors, and you can decide how Noom fits into your life and not the other way around. Noom offered a sample of 4,272 Noomers, and 98% of them said Noom helped them change their habits and behaviors for good. Sarah Frank is my colleague here at Vox. She works on the business side of things. She had a chance to try out Noom and tell us how it went.
There were days where I was overeating based on my goal and days where I was undereating. And Noom had a very clever way of also matching my mood to those days. So I could actually see after about a week that I tend to eat less on days that I'm a little anxious or stressed, and days that I'm more relaxed, I'm eating more. And I know some people's habits are the opposite of that.
You can sign up for a trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com to sign up for a trial today.
Support for this show comes from Visible Wireless. Other wireless carriers use tricks to rope you in and keep you stuck on a phone plan, like that quote-unquote free phone with a long-term contract. That's why you need a plan from Visible. When they say $25 a month, they mean $25 a month, taxes and fees included. With other carriers, surprise fees leave you wringing your hands over your phone bill every month. You never quite know what surprises are waiting for you around the corner. When it comes to choosing a phone plan, you're probably better off with one that won't spike your adrenaline or deplete your wallet. With a wireless plan from Visible, what you see is what you get. No gimmicks or added fees or unexpected frights. Get a one-line plan with unlimited 5G data powered by Verizon for just $25 a month, taxes and fees included. Switch today at Visible.com. For data management practices, visit Visible.com. In times of traffic, your data may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Mobile hotspot capped at 5 megabits per second. 5G access requires a 5G-capable device in a 5G coverage area.
We're back with Professor Rashid Khalidi of Columbia University. So, Professor, when Israel became a country in 1948, how did the rest of the world react? And here I want us to think not just about the United States and Britain, but also about what we now call the global south, or the third world, the developing world.
In 1948, most of the developing world had not yet been decolonized. India had, Pakistan had, a few countries had been liberated from colonialism. But most of what we call now the global south was still subject either to direct colonial rule by European powers, or was just in the process of liberating itself. You look at Indonesia, you look at China, you look at countries that were nominally independent or not really yet independent. And the global south didn't have the self-expression that it came to have by the 1960s, when the process of decolonization had largely been completed. How did the world look at this? Well, the first thing is, European countries and the United States looked at it almost entirely in terms of the Holocaust, for which they bore a great deal of guilt, since those countries had refused to take in people who could have been saved before World War II. When the Nazis would have let people go, had anyone opened the doors, which the United States refused to do, which Britain refused to do, which most countries in the world callously and consciously refused to do. So they bore an enormous share of guilt, justified correctly. They should have been guilty. And I think that that's one of the elements that drove the desire to support the Zionist project to create a Jewish state in a majority Arab country and give most of it under the partition plan of 1947 to this Jewish minority.
As Germany and other nations increase their persecution, treat them as pariahs and outcasts, beat them down and trample on them, the Jews are turning more and more to their promised land, the land which they were told once would be flowing with milk and honey.
All right, so the process of decolonization, we have India gaining independence from Britain, 1947, and then from 1947 onward, the dominoes start to fall. The decolonialization movement gains steam and ends with what we have today. Did the Palestinian people see themselves as part of a larger decolonial push? Were they thinking of themselves in those terms? Like Algeria was like, get the French out?
Absolutely. They did in the period before 1948. I mean, you see demands by Palestinian congresses, by Palestinian leaders, by Palestinian delegations to London, saying we are entitled to self-determination under the Covenant of the League of Nations. We are a provisionally independent nation, and we should get our independence. We're the overwhelming majority in this country. It's our country. And the British and the League of
It's an ideological recruitment. It wasn't for money. So, I mean, there's one thing, the FBI, if there's no money trail, it's very hard for them to catch a spy.
Robert Bear, who investigates now? Does this fall to, you mentioned the FBI, does this fall to FBI, CIA, state, who?
The FBI, what they're going to do is sit down, and the Department of Justice, they're going to sit down with them.
And what's the first priority as they start to question? Is it trying to assess what damage was done and contain that?
Oh, exactly, damage assessment, because don't forget that he worked in the White House, worked for Southern Command. He had access to the crown jewels, essentially, in terms of intelligence, intercepts, reporting, CIA reporting, the whole gamut. He would have seen that. The question is, what did he pass? Did he pass documents? Did he betray our abilities to intercept communications in Russia or Cuba? From the sounds of it, from what Garland said, I imagine he did. That's their suspicion, at least.
And then this must prompt all kinds of questions about who else may not be what they seem to be. Did they go around and start to question everyone who was in regular contact with them? Try to sense how wide the spider web might be?
Well, there's a group of the Cubans and the Russians, and that is, you always, once you have a spy in place, he always looks for his replacement. But an agent like this is compartmented. He's not told about other sources. He's not told about what else the Cubans are doing, DGI. He's not told what the Russians are doing. So he's sort of going to know what he passed or didn't pass. And if he tried to spot somebody else, he might be able to tell us what that was. I just can't tell you how damaging a source like this could have been. This is like, we've seen nothing like this. It's worse than Hansen, it's worse than Ames. You'd have to go back to the beginning of the Cold War.
Hang on, worse than Robert Hansen of the FBI or Rick Ames of the CIA? How so?
Hansen had limited knowledge of Russian collection, and the same with Ames. But don't forget, sitting in the White House, you get an overall view. Hansen and Ames was a geographic location. They could betray assets. But with this guy sitting in the White House, he's seeing it all. And then Southern Command, because Southern Command has all sorts of abilities to collect intelligence in South America, for instance, that somebody like Ames or Hansen would never have known about. So I would say offhand, until we hear about what the damage was, and I'm waiting for the Department of Justice and FBI to say, and this will take a couple of years, this is probably the most damaging spy scandal or penetration of the U.S. government, going way back to Roosevelt. And I don't say that lightly.
Former CIA officer Robert Baer. Thank you.
Thank you.
The presidents of 3 elite universities were on Capitol Hill today to testify about anti-Semitism on campus. The hearing comes after nearly 2 months of protests. There's also been backlash and even violence on U.S. campuses stemming from the October 7th attack by Hamas and Israel's military response in Gaza. NPR's Alyssa Nadworny reports.
The 3 campuses on the Hill today were Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, and MIT. And their presidents all had similar messages for lawmakers. First, students and staff feel unsafe amid the rise of anti-Semitism.
These events have understandably left many in our community upset and afraid.
University of Pennsylvania President Liz McGill pointed to recent protests in her city. But she said campuses need both safety and free speech in order for democracy to thrive. Something the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, admitted is a major challenge.
I've sought to confront hate while preserving free expression. This is difficult work, and I know that I have not always gotten it right.
That tension was on full display when Republican Representative Elise Stefanik of New York pushed the Harvard president on pro-Palestinian protesters' use of the word intifada.
Do you believe that type of hateful speech is contrary to Harvard's code of conduct, or is it allowed at Harvard?
It is at odds with the values of Harvard.
Can you not say here that it is against the code of conduct at Harvard?
We embrace a commitment to free expression, even of views that are objectionable, offensive, hateful.
I would be shocked if you talk to any college or university president who isn't at least thinking about this part of the time.
John Phan-Smith is with the American Council on Education, which represents hundreds of college presidents who are in a tough position, he says.
Some of this is a certain necessary ugliness that comes from college campuses being incubators of debate, being areas where free speech and ideas being challenged are encouraged.
But the federal government is clear. The Biden administration has told colleges they risk losing federal funding if they don't take aggressive steps to curb anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on campus. To do that, the three testifying today said they are increasing police presence on campus, making student concerns easier to report, and expanding access to mental health services for students and staff, among others. Alyssa Nadworny, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
The superintendent of a juvenile detention center in Tennessee locks away minors in solitary confinement.
What we do is treat everybody like they're in here for murder. You don't have any problem if you do that.
Except it's illegal. What can a state do when a jail breaks the rules? Tomorrow on Morning Edition from NPR News.
Join Marianne Zalesnik from 5 until 9 on 91.7 WVXU.
Support for WVXU comes from Cincinnati Nature Center and its 4th annual Light in the Forest. Open on select nights throughout December, this celestial walk through the winter woods features artistic light displays, interactive activities, music, food trucks, drinks, and holiday shopping. For more information and tickets, visit cincynature.org.
Southbound 75 at Paddock, there's a wreck on the right shoulder. Northbound 747 at Tyler's Hill, there's a wreck there. And southbound Princeton Pike just before 275, there's a wreck.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Elsie Chang.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. Coming up, the novel Orbital offers a different view of life on Earth by taking us aboard the International Space Station.
Isn't it extraordinary that we live here? Isn't that incredible? You just want to show it to people and say, oh, this is what we have, and also isn't it weird, and aren't we alone?
First, these news headlines.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. On Capitol Hill, the Senate has approved a backlog of more than 400 military promotions in one block. This after Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville ended his blockade, following heavy criticism from many of his GOP colleagues in the Senate. Tuberville was holding up the votes in protest of a pending policy ensuring abortion access for service members. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he hopes other GOP senators take note.
I hope they learn the lesson of Senator Tuberville, and that is he held out for many, many months, hurt our national security, caused discombobulation to so many military families who've been so dedicated to our country, and didn't get anything they wanted.
Fellow Republicans criticized Tuberville's blockade, saying it damaged military readiness. An Israeli airstrike today killed a Lebanese soldier in the first known Lebanese army death since Israel and the Iran-backed militia Hezbollah began cross-border attacks back in October. The Israeli military has not commented. We get more from NPR's Graf from Beirut.
Lebanon's armed forces said a soldier was killed and 3 others were wounded when Israel struck what it called an armed forces center near the border town of Nadi Al-Leda. The attack was unusual because Lebanon's army has stayed out of the fighting. Prime Minister Najib Mikati has said that Lebanon, which is suffering a financial and political crisis, would not attack Israel, but called for a peace plan. Hezbollah, which is more powerful than the Lebanese army, has been trading cross-border attacks with Israel since the start of the Gaza war. Jane Araf, NPR News, Beirut.
Stocks finished mostly mixed on Wall Street after reports showed the job market is cooling in the face of higher interest rates, but still remains healthy. This is NPR.
Good afternoon. It's 5:33 and 44 degrees in Cincinnati. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Bill Reithart. A bank in Price Hill is just the second in Ohio to be designated a minority depository institution. WVXU's Dana Weingartner has details.
A minority depository institution, or MDI, has a greater ability to assist minority communities with getting loans and other financial products. The board at Warsaw Federal Savings and Loan decided to pursue the designation to provide more services to the Price Hill community. Warsaw Federal President and CEO Robbie Suggs was brought on earlier this year to lead the transition.
We can also get funds from other government sources and other foundations that are interested in investing in an organization like an MDI. So it's a way for us to find different products and services that more uniquely fit the consumers that we support.
There are only about 140 MDIs in the country. The only other one in Ohio is in Columbus. Tana Weingartner, 91.7 WVXU.
A day after Ohio Republican senators proposed changing and even wiping out some of the provisions of the recreational marijuana law voters approved last month, the House Republican has responded with his own bill. As State House correspondent Joe Ingles reports, this lawmaker has been a longtime supporter of legal marijuana.
Republican Representative Jamie Callender says his bill would keep much of the voter-approved provision intact.
Want to make sure that here in this chamber, the People's House, that we carry out the will of the people, and the people have spoken.
Callender's bill aligns with Ohio's ban on smoking in public places and has some child protections on advertising and access, but it leaves intact the home grow provision that allows up to 12 plants in one household, though it does put what he calls guardrails in place to ban many pot farms. Callender says the tax structure is negotiable, but should be in line with the statute to encourage buying pot in Ohio and tamping down on the illegal market. Joe Ingles at the Ohio Public Radio State House News Bureau.
Mostly cloudy overnight. Some folks could see some flurries. An overnight low of 32. Partly to mostly cloudy for Wednesday with still some flurries possible. A high tomorrow of 40. It's 43 degrees now. This is 91.7 WVXU.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Ooma, a cloud-based phone service for any size business with an automated virtual receptionist, video meetings, and other features to connect to customers and coworkers anywhere at ooma.com/NPR. And from the law firm Cooley LLP, with offices in the U.S., Europe, and Asia, Cooley advises entrepreneurs, investors, financial institutions, and established companies around the world. Where innovation meets the law, this is NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. This next story is about a rare sort of friendship between two men who lived on either side of the barrier that separates Gaza from Israel. They never met in person, but they bonded over their hopes for peace until one of them was killed in the war. NPR's Fatma Tanis has their story.
These are the words Ariel Bernstein wrote in a letter to remember his friend.
These days, when someone dies, you first have to declare which side of the wall they belong, before being granted permission to be sad. But on Monday, an exceptionally rare man who caused no harm to anyone was killed.
Khalil Abu Yahya was a writer, activist, and English teacher in Gaza. Ariel Bernstein, a former soldier for the Israel Defense Forces, now an anti-occupation activist. He and Abu Yahya met at an event where Bernstein was speaking last year.
In 2014, I was in a combat unit, and I spent several weeks in the ground invasion of Gaza. So I was speaking about my experiences, and right after me, they brought up a man on Zoom to speak to the group, and this was the first time I met Khalil.
It was the first time he had ever heard someone from inside Gaza talking about life under the Israeli blockade and Hamas rule. And he was surprised.
When he spoke about his dreams and hopes and how he believes in the basic idea that everybody deserves freedom and equality, and how he doesn't have hatred in his heart towards Israelis, and he would like for us to be able to find a solution and where he could come and visit people in Israel. And he had this charisma to him that was really appealing.
After the event, the two men stayed in touch. They organized other events together that were held in Israel, where Abu Yahya joined by Zoom and spoke to a small but captivated audience of Israelis. He had several other friends in Israel too, peace activists, climate researchers who were interested in Gaza. Abu Yahya would update them on fuel and water developments. His kindness and optimism was contagious, and he cared deeply about his friends, often sending voice notes like this one.
You know that feeling that I cannot come and see you, my friends, at comrades, and you too cannot come and visit me in Gaza. Oh, I don't want anyone to undergo this feeling, no? That's life. Hugs, love, and the music, and appreciation, and thanks, and everything from Gaza to you.
Abu Yahya only left Gaza once in his life to get life-saving treatment at a hospital in East Jerusalem. Bernstein says his friend got accepted at a university in England, but couldn't get permission from Israel to go.
He really started to not be constricted by the situation he was in, and mentally he was so much freer, and he had a larger vision of the world than most people. He didn't channel his pain into hate, but he managed to see a bigger picture.
On October 7, Hamas militants broke out of Gaza and attacked communities in southern Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking dozens hostage. Israel retaliated with an ongoing bombardment of Gaza, killing at least 15,000 Palestinians. When the war broke out, Bernstein and Abu Yahya were constantly texting each other.
It kind of changes everything. When you actually know someone personally, it makes it much more difficult when you hear about the bombings and all. And he started moving south to where the army said it would be safe.
Then Bernstein got the dreaded news. The building Abu Yahya was sheltering in was hit by an airstrike. Bernstein not only lost his friend, but also a sense of hope.
Here, they try to convince you that everyone in Gaza are just monsters that want to kill you because you're Jewish. And here I know someone who lives there. He wasn't looking for trouble. He